Hi there. Welcome to Business Leadership Podcast. In this podcast, I interview successful business leaders and industry experts to help you grow your business. I truly believe that sometimes a single insight can completely change your business directions and allow you to achieve your business goals. In this episode, I interviewed Gerry Valentine. Gerry is the author of The Thriving Mindset, Tools for Empowerment in a Disruptive World. Gerry is a public speaker. He's an executive coach, business advisor with extensive experience as a Fortune 100 leader. Me and Gerry had a discussion on various different topics. As if you're a business leader, you want to watch this discussion to the very end. I think you're really gonna enjoy my discussion with Gerry when he shares the insight on how to inspire people to build a resilience, to overcome setbacks, and to look at challenges in the new ways, and to understand that adversity could become a source of resilience. He also shares perspective on the importance of failure and how to focus on adversity to build, creative and innovative culture. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe and send us your feedback. Until next time, enjoy. Hi guys, welcome to Business Leadership Podcast. Today my guest is someone very special, Gerry Valentine. Gerry is the author of a new book, The Thriving Mindset. And Gerry's is keynote speaker, executive coach, and thought leader for so many years, helping out business leaders. Gerry, welcome to the podcast. I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Jeremy, thank you so much for having me. I've been really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. The topic, the mindset is very dear to me. As we were just talking before the start of our podcast. This is very timely what we just gone through for last couple of years. So let's talk from disruption. The disruption happened in many different areas. Definitely impacted human lives for the last couple of years. It impacted a company financially, in terms of people, and also some opportunities. In the light of this chaos. What do you see as a disruption just happened for the last couple of years? If you just walk us through how you see the disruption and what do you think it's all about?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. As you said, this is a topic we're both very interested in. So, for me, the beginning of COVID a couple of years ago was when I was in the final stages of writing my book. And the book, titled The Thriving Mindset, Tools for Empowerment in a Disruptive World. And literally, I was proofreading the final pages when COVID started to erupt. Okay. And as I had to think about, what am I going to do? Do I, hold off publishing this book and, edit COVID into it as this thing unfolds? Or do I believe the tools I've put forth are equal to the moment? And after a lot of thought, I decided, just one of the principles I talk about in the book is that disruption is part of life. So COVID is a type of disruption that we have not seen in about a century. The last time was the flu of 1918 that had a similar death toll, although it did not go on for quite as long. But even before COVID, I think that we were living through a very disruptive world. So we have a lot of forces at work. So we have, advanced computerization. Our computers are getting smaller and faster than ever before. You and I walk around with more computer power on our phone or in our Apple Watch than was used to send the first Apollo missions to the moon. We then have, it's not only the computers are getting smaller and faster, they're getting smarter. So we have the press of artificial intelligence. And now we have machines that can perform tasks better than humans in a growing number of domains. The internet has had a fascinating effect on the world. And I think I've been reading a lot about cryptocurrency recently and the impact that's we're speculating that may have. And people are talking about it as if it was the internet. And so it's we could not have imagined 10, 20 years ago the impact the internet would have, but it's been dramatic. That has led to what I call a shrinking world, which means that we are all much closer than we ever were before. So you and I right now, we're collaborating. I'm in New York City. You're in
just
Toronto.
North of Toronto, yeah.
Toronto. So, but we can collaborate seamlessly. 20 years ago, that was not a possibility. So these forces, I think, have really put a lot of pressure on our society. From one way, you can look at it, it's a time of tremendous opportunity. Another way of looking at it is that it's a time of disenfranchisement. So what we've seen are a lot of voices in business, in society, that are riled up, resistant, sometimes resentful of progress because they've been left behind, which is true. And I think there's a huge social justice thing that we have to address. My work is, how do I help people shift from being left behind or broken by disruption to being the people who can see the opportunity and thrive in the face of disruption?
Mm-hmm.
And the way I look at it is, there are certain skills that you build. That's what the book was about. And what I think I've learned over the last 2 years of COVID is that it's the same skills. COVID is just another disruptive force, be it a dramatically and tragically disruptive force, but it is yet another disruptive force. Some people are thriving and some people are being crushed by it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. This disruption. Some of the items we were working on it, but we were very slow. But it kind of forced on us. One of the example is working remotely. There was some remote work in place before COVID, but when that happened, it kind of forced us on that, right? So we kind of move forward much faster than we wanted to, right? So a lot of during this disruption, a lot of opportunities, as you mentioned, that you focus on how do you during all those chaos, how do you focus on opportunity? How do you go on that? And definitely that's where the thriving part comes in. So walk us through, what do you mean by thriving mindset? Because that's a critical piece of, a title of your book, and critical piece of that to look into. You can look at either way. You can look at the chaos or you can look at an opportunity. So what is the thriving mindset from your definition?
Exactly. So, the heart of the thriving mindset is something that I call the adversity fear paralysis cycle.
Okay.
And I use that as a foundation with my clients of the book, because I believe that is the cycle that prevents people from thriving in the face of disruption. And the people who know how to break out of that cycle, and that's where the mindset comes in and the skills come in, are the people who can find opportunity. So let me explain how the cycle works a little bit. So what I believe is disruption and adversity are just a natural part of life. They're a natural part of being in business. They're a natural part of whatever you might do. So, we started talking about the pressures, the disruptive pressures that were going on before COVID, then we hit COVID. There's going to be more disruption after COVID. Now we have a war going on in Europe, yet another disruptive force that is having all kinds of fallout. So it goes on and on and on. Okay. The natural response to adversity or disruption is fear. And it's the fear that we may not be equal to the demands of the disruption. And I tell people there's nothing wrong with that fear. The problem is when you allow that fear to turn into what I call a type of paralysis, which is an unproductive response to the disruption. Yeah. And the problem with paralysis is that either the initial disruption gets worse or a newest disruption arises. So an example that I love to use for this is a company called Kodak, which you and I are both old enough to remember. Okay. So Kodak was on the forefront, industry leader for more than a century, and then went bankrupt in 2012. Now, a lot of people might say, because of digital photography, it's obvious. Mm-hmm. But what most people don't know is that Kodak actually invented the first digital camera back in 1975. So then that leads to the question, well, how could this happen? So if they invented the first digital camera, how can they be undone by their own invention? And the answer is that adversity fear paralysis cycle. So the Kodak engineer who invented the first digital camera is a guy by the name of Steve Sasson, and he has spoken extensively, including in a New York Times article not long ago, about what those early days were like at the company, and about just encountering a wall of resistance with Kodak's top leadership about this notion of a digital camera. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, we can understand it, right? Because at that point in time, Kodak was led by men who only understood the film business. And you and I are old enough to remember, so back in the day, you took your pictures, often in a Kodak camera, on Kodak film. You then took that film to the drugstore to be developed, typically in Kodak chemicals. Mm-hmm. And then in about a week, you went back and got your prints printed on what? Kodak paper.
I got
So
you.
now we have an invention that is literally a threat to every step in that value chain.
Okay.
And this guy Sasson, he mentions in desperation trying to explain to the top brass at the time that this was more than just about taking pictures. That this might mean that you could someday send pictures over the phone line. Now again, that statement in today's world seems almost comical, right?
Yeah.
But what happened was top leadership at Kodak at that time allowed their fear of change to cause a paralysis that prevented them from leveraging their own invention. They did eventually get into the digital photography business, but it was too late, and the competition had an insurmountable lead by that point. Mm-hmm. So, this is Kodak's experience, but what I encourage people to think about is that this cycle happens all the time. It's all around us. So, mm-hmm. We've all seen that, fearful manager, perhaps newly promoted manager who micromanages their team and paralyzes their team. Some of us have had friends who've been in a, bad relationship or gotten themselves into bad financial straits, and we watch them make one bad decision after another. They say they're trying to dig themselves out, but we can see they're just making the hole bigger and bigger. Mm-hmm. I had an interesting experience, or a friend of mine had an interesting experience, which I think was a perfect example of the cycle. So I have a very good friend from business school who's a consultant, and he was speaking at an event recently that was being hosted at a United Auto Workers owned facility. Okay. And he was told by the organizer that he needed to rent an American-made car, because when he showed up at the facility, they were going to check the VIN number. Okay. And if it was not manufactured in the United States, they would not allow him to park on the facility.
Wow.
So story goes on.
Yeah.
So he says, okay, I'm a guest, I'll do what I need to do. So he calls, and this is in quite a remote area. So he calls the local rental agency and relays the need. And the local rental agency says on the phone to a stranger, "Oh, don't worry about that. We don't keep no foreign made car scrap here. We only have American cars." Except they didn't actually say foreign made car scrap. They used an offensive racial slur, like something that I will not repeat.
Okay.
So let's think about this, right? Mm-hmm. So very contemporary example of adversity, fear, paralysis, right? So you have in the Kodak example, I would say, who better to reimagine what photography would ultimately become than a company that had 100 years of experience in the business. Yeah. Right. So that's a totally different perspective. Mm-hmm. Now let's fast forward to the car story. So in telling this story, I want to be clear. I'm a very big supporter of organized labor. I think labor unions are extremely important. So this is not a slam against UAW in any way. Mm-hmm. But what this story does show is that everybody, even organizations that are fundamentally benevolent, can be caught in the cycle. So one thing you can say is, okay, like you saw fit to purchase or rent a competitor's product. I don't want you here. Don't park here. Yeah. Different perspective is, oh, you saw fit to buy a competitor's product. You know what? Come here. I want to get to know you. Yeah. Bring the car. Yeah. I want to look. Tell me what about it was so great. Mm-hmm. Like, I really want to know. And then you can go even worse. And the issue with this cycle is when you get into that fear paralysis place, it can really provoke some of the worst human instincts. Mm-hmm. And that's what we saw at the rental counter. So that's where fear of foreign competition is causing racist sentiments to emerge. And we've all seen this before in history. And sadly, I think we're at a moment where that's a real risk, where being caught in this cycle is causing some really bad behaviors to emerge. And so once again, historical example, personal examples, this is all around us, even like very contemporary, doing business, renting a car example of how this cycle can strike.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I've seen this very often. This Gerry, what you just mentioned. It's business leaders. Because I run a technology company, and I get to meet a lot of business leaders because they're trying to get somewhere in business, and we partner. So over the last 10, 12 years, I've been going through a lot of business leaders, and we're talking to them and trying to help them get there. Business leaders, where I see, and this is my personal opinion, but this is what I see in the market generally is, owner of the company or CEO of the company, they're a lot of, how do I say, age group of, I would say, above 55, right? So they're so
our age group,
right? They're so intimidated by technology. They got simply so fear about the change in technology, so they don't want to deal with it. Simply say, "Oh, I got a CTO, I got a CIO to deal with it." So that's how I would say 98, 97% mindset is that. Hey, listen, now this is not something I want to get involved with. I'm going to hire somebody.
I want someone. Yeah, keep it away from me.
Exactly.
I'm afraid of it. Keep it away. It's kind of like the car. I'm afraid of it. Keep it away from me. Yeah. And precisely the wrong mindset. And then here, we've been talking about COVID. I want to talk about what just a couple of minutes about what I have observed in my clients with COVID. So I've come to say that COVID's an accelerator. So what I've observed happen with my clients is that whatever was there before got accelerated, whether it was good or bad. So in the beginning of the pandemic, I took to telling my clients, I need you to mind the cracks in your organization because they're going to widen. So the clients who had cultures where they had trouble communicating, real difficulties within the organization, okay, you suddenly send everybody home and they're on Zoom. Guess what? It got worse. Yeah. I have another client who actually is a CTO, and he had been working furiously with his organization pre-COVID for over a year to develop a digital capability such that they could work from anywhere. And he justified it in the organization. He'd send out equipment, and they were really good. COVID hit, they went home, they didn't miss a day. It accelerated the capability that was already there. Clients of mine who have really strong cultures and were great at coming together during difficult times and wrestling it down and figuring out what they needed to do. Okay, great. So you send them all home. It's a pandemic. There's lots of tragedy around us. They were able to huddle together and support each other just like they did in the office. So in my opinion, a disruption like COVID, it's an accelerator. So if you were already trapped in that cycle, it just got faster. If you were breaking out of the cycle, which we can talk about ways to break out in a moment, the capabilities that were there before helped you excel in this more disruptive situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that acceleration you're talking about, and that happens even before and after COVID, Gerry. If you one of the items I see is that the mindset trickles down from the top to the bottom. So if
very much,
if you're not seeing the opportunity in a destructions like this, right, what we're going through right now, not only if you have a CEO or a business owner that who's not looking that way, you're gonna see that all the levels below also with the same mindset. Right.
Exactly.
And if you see that, if you meet somebody's IT manager or a finance manager or purchasing manager, they have that mindset of learning and growing and thriving in a no matter what happens, you will see the same mindset in a business leadership as well. Right. So these things don't happen overnight. They're just, they kind of accelerated, but the mindset was already there for those companies. I take it that, it just kind of got accelerated over the time when the disruption happened.
That is precisely it. This stuff, when people go and, I work with a lot of clients, as it sounds like you do, who are ascending the ladders into more senior leadership. And one of the things that I tell my clients all the time, particularly when you go to the most senior levels, you're going to go under a microscope. And you have to be prepared for that. I had a client long ago who's really smart guy, newly promoted CIO, and he had a relatively large company. And one of the things that he believed in the past that helped him be successful was that he was very jovial. He was, very open and friendly with a pretty large group, but with everybody, go out to drinks, backslapping, a lot of open conversation. What he had to learn when he pivoted up was that the conversation was too open, because once he got to that more senior level, people were observing everything he said.
Yeah.
And then making decisions on something that he said, over drinks, last Friday, was not intended to be a company statement, and it blew out of proportion.
Yeah.
And, it's something, it's not a bad thing. It's just a thing. If you aspire to more senior levels of leadership, you have to become more mindful of what you say and how you act, because you have a very big megaphone, and your actions are going to be magnified through the organization. And then pivoting to your point, if you have this paralysis mindset, it's going to permeate through the organization, because you have a very big megaphone, and people are watching you as a senior leader for clues about how they ought to behave. If you are of what I call the thriving mindset and can make what I call courageous leaps out of this cycle, that gets signaled down to the organization as well. And there's something else that, I remind people of. Often people will say, I can't get innovative talent. I can't get people who engage in critical thinking. I can't get people who, want to have this thriving mindset. But when you look at the leadership, they don't have it themselves.
Yeah.
And what will happen is, if you have those talented people at lower levels in the organization that want to be innovative and thrive in the face of disruption, and they don't see it in their leadership, they will exit.
Yeah.
They will exit. Yes, they will exit the organization, and quickly, because those are the people who will say, this is not the right environment for me. Yeah. I need to go somewhere else. And so you start hemorrhaging that kind of talent if you can't, as a leader, demonstrate the behaviors that you need to demonstrate.
So as a business leader, if you don't have a mindset of thriving and understanding and learning and looking at, staying focused, it's like a laser focus on opportunity, not on a chaos in a company. Mm-hmm. If you don't have can you still survive in this day and age? Because, the COVID forced us to, a lot of companies have to re-innovate their product. A lot of companies have to re-innovate their services, right? So a lot of innovation has to happen because the disruption happened. But if you're not laser focused on opportunity and looking ahead of you, can you still survive this day and age, Gerry, in a business?
I don't believe you can. I think the clock is ticking. So, one of the thing that I want to talk go a little deeper on what that means for that thriving mindset. So, we've talked about this adversity, fear, paralysis cycle and how it holds people hostage. Mm-hmm. So the thing that I tell leaders and people that in whole organizations that I want them to think about, the key is, when you find yourself in this cycle, in this place of fear about disruption and change, there's actually nothing wrong with being afraid. I think it is the natural reaction. And frankly, I don't trust anyone who looks around right now and tells me they're not afraid, because then I think you're not paying attention. There's a lot to be afraid of. But you don't have to be trapped by the fear. You can learn to see that fear that naturally comes with disruption as a signal that you're also standing in front of an opportunity. And leaders and organizations can learn to use that feeling as a kind of springboard to leap out of this cycle and towards the opportunity. And I call that making a courageous leap out of disruption. And these people who can thrive in the face of disruption are really good at using that place of fear to see the opportunity and then making these courageous leaps out of the opportunity. Mm-hmm. I mean, out of the fear and into the opportunity. And the one of the things I talk about in the book, and we can probably hit a few of them today, are the skills that you need to put in place in yourself to foster in your organization such that you can make those courageous leaps at those critical times. Because yes, that's what we need right now. More people who can make courageous leaps.
Yeah, very interesting. One of the a book I was reading recently, Louis Hose, I know he was talking on his podcast. They were talking about the competition in a business and also the creativity. When you're driving from the fear mindset, what you just mentioned, that if having a fear is no, is a normal, as you mentioned, it's a human sense. We all gonna go through fears. But when you're making decisions out of the fear and you're holding a company down out of the fear, that creates competition. But when you are involved in those competition and fear, you lack creativity in a business. You lack opportunities.
Exactly.
Right? So
Exactly.
you can do either one, but not the both at the same time.
You cannot. So you can either run. Another way to think of it, you can run towards the fear, or you can, that thing that you're afraid of, or you can run away from it. Mm-hmm. So like when you refuse to look at the competitor's product, I argue you're running away from it.
Yeah.
But you can run towards it and become curious about it. And like, so what can we do? But I also think like there are certain skills, and we're kind of touching on some of them. So I think we need to tease them out, because people will say to me, okay, Gerry, I get it. I see the cycle. I get this notion of courageous leaps. I'm going to tell my people, as you have told me to say, there is nothing wrong with being afraid. It's what you do when you're afraid that matters. Great. Got it. What do you want us to do when we're afraid?
Yeah.
And so and those are the skills to build. So one of them we're kind of talking around right now that I want to tease out is this notion of curiosity. So people who thrive and excel at times of disruption, in my opinion, are insatiably curious. It's almost like they can't turn it off.
Yeah.
And that's a very, very good thing, because when a disruptive force arises and you become curious about it, what does it bring? What does this really mean? What should we do about it? And you're running towards it with curiosity rather than away from it in fear. That's when you start to be able to see the opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. So, some of the items we already talked about, courageous is one of them. Looks like these are the skills business leader needed to develop first before they can trickle down in a company. So
absolutely.
Courage is one of them, and you talk about, the fear. So, and persistence is another one. I think in a book you're talking about the persistence as well, very important, but looks like these are the skills that business leaders have to build. And especially with the time of disruption, when there's so much, information around, so much fear, how do you build these, these skills
into your organization? Yeah, exactly. And I think it's about putting everyday practices in. Let me tell you about another skill that I think is critical for leaders to develop themselves. And when you develop it, you can mirror the behavior that you want to within your team. Okay. So so we've already talked about curiosity, right?
Yep.
To approach everything with a spirit of curiosity, more why questions, how questions. Why have we always done it this way? Not from a judgmental standpoint, but from a curiosity standpoint. One of the things that helps you do that is when you develop in yourself and in your people a culture that supports what I call intellectual capital. Okay. Intellectual capital, it's a multidimensional concept. I tend to think of it in 4 layers. So the first layer is what I call foundational knowledge. So that's the kind of stuff we learned in our formal education. And depending on what you do, that might be the first 12 years of life, or it might be the first 25 years of life. Depending on who you are. Now, the problem people run into is that in the past, our assumption was that formal education would provide you with the skills you needed to make you productive for a lifetime. Mm-hmm. That is no longer a realistic proposition, no matter who you are, because the world around you is changing too fast. So that foundational layer of intellectual capital is not enough. The next layer up is what I call critical thinking. And critical thinking, like people, business leaders talk about it a lot, but I think people do a very bad job of explaining what it is. Mm-hmm. I think critical thinking is the ability to use foundational knowledge in an unfamiliar setting. So you've got this basis of foundational knowledge.
Yeah.
but can you apply that knowledge in an unfamiliar setting? So one of the stories I tell when I talk about this. So I don't know if I even told you this. So you do a lot of work in technology. My undergraduate degree is actually in electrical and computer engineering, which is why I end up coaching so many technology leaders. My undergraduate's from Cornell University, Cornell Engineering School, a long time ago, and I'm quick to say that I never took the technical path. I just got the electrical and computer engineering degree. So one of the things we would joke about in Cornell Engineering School is that if you saw a particular problem on a homework assignment, you could cross it off the possibility for the test. You will never see the same problem on the test. On the test, there will be the application of the same concept in a context that you have not seen before.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
Because at that, Cornell Engineering School, I will say, is an extraordinary education. I consider it, a huge privilege to have been able to get that level of education. And one of the things they were very clear about is that we're teaching you critical thinking skills. Mm-hmm. We are not, learning how to execute these problems on, a homework assignment is not enough. You've got to understand the concept, and you've got to be able to recognize that concept in a totally unfamiliar context and be able to figure out which to apply. I found that to support me my entire life. And because that is the thing that we really want as business leaders. We want people who have excellent foundational knowledge and then can use that foundational knowledge in an unfamiliar context. So now the next layer up in this 4-layer pyramid is what I call social intelligence. Okay. And that has become increasingly important in today's world. So, people, think about, in the old world, almost militaristic hierarchies in companies. It doesn't work that way anymore. Virtually every company has some type of matrix structure. Typically, we're collaborating globally now. Yep. So I'm a solopreneur. I run a company of one, and I collaborate with partners literally around the world. I have clients across the country, and my suppliers are around the world. Yeah. Even as a company as one, back in my corporate days, I spent much of my career with Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. I led teams that were global. Yeah. Literally, we followed the sun. That requires an ability to collaborate well with a very large number of people, often people from very different cultures, and to be comfortable in that kind of collaboration. So that's that next level of intellectual capital. Okay. And then the top in this pyramid is self-education. So we all, because of the speed of change today, we all need the ability to develop new skills on the fly, and you're going to need it for the rest of your career. Yeah. So, once again, I mentioned my undergrads in electrical and computer engineering. I have an MBA. There's some NYU, but very technical disciplines, right? So I haven't taken an English class since high school, right? Because engineering school, you don't do that. Yeah. Business school, you do some writing, but it's a very different type of writing. You don't do that. Running my business at, I guess, how old was when I started the book? I was 56 or 57 when I decided to write the book. Okay. I realized I need a new skill. Like I need to be able to write to the level that I can write a book. And I have no intention of ghostwriting this book. I have a blog series now. I publish quite a bit on LinkedIn. Writing is part of my business. Yeah. At this stage in my career, I hired a writing coach. I engaged in a number of self-education activities because the foundational knowledge that I had gotten long ago and had added to was no longer sufficient for what I wanted to do for the next step. So new skills need to be added. We all need to do that. Yeah. Lifelong learning needs to be, it's at top of that intellectual capital pyramid. And it's behavior that leaders need to model for their entire organizations. So like I've just talked about a big skill here. It's like a whole chapter in the book. But can you see when you have this pyramid of intellectual capital, you combine that with curiosity, how that better lets you see opportunity at disruptive times.
Very
Does that
interesting.
make sense?
Yeah. No, very interesting. Especially with a lot of business owners, my fellow business owner who run a technology company, we all came from technical background. That's why we build the
Mm-hmm.
businesses, right? But you
Mm-hmm.
cannot build a business or run a business on a technical knowledge, right? You need to
Nope.
learn business development. You gotta talk to people. You gotta do presentations. You gotta to you
You
know
might have to write.
you have to write.
Right.
You have to write. So you're absolutely right. You gotta pick up that skill set, and not picking a skill set, it just hinder your success in a business, right? So you need to pick up those skill set.
You will not
So
grow
important.
if, yeah, you will not grow. And there's so many ways to do it. I mean, there's formal training. Sometimes we get coaches and mentors. I am a coach, and I have hired coaches for myself. Sometimes, it's just reading. I believe you should always be reading, and your reading should be diverse, because that's what's going to fuel your intellectual capital. And I think this notion of self-education needs to be a way of life.
Yeah.
That's the key.
Yeah.
If you want to be a successful business person, and I think a successful citizen, self-education simply needs to be a way of life.
Yeah. It's a definitely, we go to computer science program or any computer science, they're not teaching you they're not teaching you the knowledge of computers, or they're teaching you
Mm-mm.
how to learn. The
Exactly.
biggest skill set you learn from school is how to learn. Can I grab a book? Can I learn
Exactly.
it? Can I go through it? So that's a process you learn. And IT people get trained with that stuff. Not we don't learn how to program C. This language, how to program in this language. We learn how to program, and that
If you're
doesn't.
in a good program, and
Yeah.
that's one of the things. I don't have children myself, but that is one of the things. I have friends who, kids are approaching college age now, or in college, and I think that's one of the this is not just business. This is more societal things that's important to think about. Not all education, not all college degrees are created equal, and that's a very unfortunate thing right now. So, there's a school of thought that, and this can worry me in the STEM fields, where the goal is to learn a marketable skill, like learn how to do X, so that you can get a job. So it is always important that we are able to support ourselves. That is, we need to be productive people who can get jobs,
Yeah.
pay our rent, see to our financial.
Add
Very
value.
important. Right. Add value in the world. Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But we need to really add value in the world. And in order to really add value in the world, you have to learn how to learn. Like that is how it's not about, and I love the way you put it, actually. It's not about getting a job. It's the point of an education is to be a productive citizen.
Got it.
And there are many dimensions to being a productive citizen.
Mm-hmm.
There's the dimension of, yes, I can support myself and I can be an economically productive member of society. But that's not enough to be a productive citizen. Mm-hmm. You also need to have a breadth of understanding. You also need to understand concepts that are actually not in your area of study. You need to be able to evolve and self-educate for a lifetime. That you need to be able to ask critical questions.
Yeah.
That's what a real education is. And I worry tremendously about pumping out people who have a very limited skill. Like, sometimes I know, industry is hungry for programmers, developers, or at least that was a few years ago. Yeah. All these programs sprung up. You don't need a degree. We'll teach you to be a coder in 6 weeks or something crazy like that. And I look at those with tremendous worry, because I think we're creating the factory welders of tomorrow.
Yeah, you're right.
Like that's what's going to happen.
I think the same way. It's you creating another labor job. From one to another one. It's just a different skill set, but it's the same process.
It's another labor job that's ultimately going to become obsolete. And again, I want people to be productive. I want people to be able to pay their rent and to raise their families and to be economically productive members of society. Absolutely. It's not enough. Yeah. And I think companies need to foster that concept as well internally, because when you do that, then you can be a thriving company.
Yeah. It's very well put, Gerry. When you what you mentioned about the learning is it opens up tons of opportunities for you. I give you example. When I start, I never written articles, or when I was in a previous, my career, I was teaching, I was coaching, I was a software developer. So when I started writing, I didn't realize that it sharpened my mind on the ideas I was trying to deliver. I was more focused by writing, on a paper. I could deliver that same material in a less, very effectively and a very minimum time, and very clearly to other people. So it kind of get you focused on the right things, and you eliminate a lot of stuff is not important when you start writing on a piece of paper, right? So, but that opens up opportunity for me taking on writing. But I was resisting in early on, but me taking on that, it opens up opportunity. So my fellow, there's a lot of there's a lot of great IT, people in IT industry, even in other industries, and they all want to learn, they want to strive, they understand this, what you just mentioned, learning is important. But there's also, I go through, especially I get very disappointed when I see IT industry folks, IT professionals, they are so resistant of learning, or they're so resistant of change. And a lot of business leaders I work with. Change is one of that. Change management, or change is one of those things that fears them most. That, hey, listen, what's going to happen if I change that? So, how could we help those people? Where can they start? How do we help those business leaders to take on that and be a little bit more courageous and take on those changes?
Yeah. So here's what I advise people, and this is another skill to create that thriving mindset. I advise my clients to do a couple things. So first off, when people talk about that fear of change, what they're really talking about is the fear of failure. So I'm afraid that I'm going to make this change and it's going to fail, right? And I think leaders need to really change their perspective on failure. And what you need to do is to, rather than think about, okay, succeeded or failed, how do I run my business like a series of well-constructed experiments?
Okay.
Right? And so lead your people in a way that's well-constructed experiments. So sometimes I'll get called into clients who say, Gerry, I want you to do a talk on innovation, or I want you to come in and coach these people on innovation because they don't innovate. And I'll say, great, one of my favorite topics to talk about. Tell me something. How do you guys deal with failure? And often I'll get a little bit of a look, and they'll say, we don't tolerate failure. We are winners. we don't fail. And then I say, okay, so what you need is not for me to do a talk. What you need is to change that perspective. Because if you are so fearful of failure, that's that paralysis trap. Because change, innovation requires the risk of failure. Most great ideas are preceded by a whole line of failures. So, and if you tell your people, we don't tolerate failure, then they're gonna think very narrowly, right? And if you as a leader start to think about, I don't tolerate failure. I actually once had a senior leader really long ago, very senior guy came into the organization. He was literally 3 levels ahead of me, above me. And when he came in, I went to meet with him, say hello, spent some time in his office. And one of the things he told me was that he had never failed at anything. And I thought, this is going to be a bumpy ride. And he, as expected, he was awful. He did not last very long. No, don't think like that. Think about, how do we create and manage the business like a laboratory? So when your people come to you with ideas, or when you have an idea, how can you construct a test of that idea that A, doesn't put the overall business at risk, and B, so construct a laboratory around the idea, right? So laboratories are very specific things, right? They're controlled environments where you can test a phenomenon without causing harm in the outside world. Like, that's one of the definitions of laboratory, right? So how do you create laboratories within your organization? Secondly, how do you encourage your people to use those laboratories to construct what I call intelligent experiments? So an intelligent experiment is, I had this business idea. I constructed a test of, pricing and how we marketed it and all of that. And you know what? It failed. And what I learned was it wasn't about the pricing, it wasn't about the marketing, it was about this idea is actually not a good idea. Nobody wants it.
Yeah.
So my learning from this test is we should never do this again. That's a success for the business. That's not a failure for the person running that test. That's a success for the business. Conversely, I've spoken to many people who, are maybe more entrepreneurial and, they're at a time when their business is doing really well. And I've said, so help me understand, why is this year going so well? I don't know. Not good, right? Okay,
No,
so yes,
good.
we got the dots. Not good, because when the phone stops ringing, you will have no idea why it stopped.
Why it worked, yeah.
So this notion of it's about always focusing on the learning, because when you focus on the learning, then, and when you're tolerant of that failure, because the failure happened in a laboratory, it wasn't something that was going to take the entire business down. It was, certain amount of money invested for a certain amount of time. There are controls around it, and the experiment is constructed well enough such that at the end, I will know the answers. If it doesn't work, I will either know, listen, I tested all the levers, this thing is not going to work, or there is this one lever that I think if we move, it's going to work. And I can do another test. That's how it really happens. And you can see that's a very different mindset. And you can imagine how, that looks different at the leadership level, right? So a person comes to you with an idea, one, if you're fearful of change, your response might be, we don't do that. Like, why would you ever want to do that? Why would camera photos on a TV? What? Like, they're not, go away. Like, none of that, right? A different mindset is, that's an interesting idea. We've never tried it. I'm curious, like how could you put together a test of that idea? Because here are my concerns about why it might not work. How can you arrange a test that will help allay my concerns about why it might not work? I'd like you to think about that and come back to me when you have a proposal. And I'm really interested. I'm skeptical, but I'm really interested in seeing how you might develop this and test it. Different leader, right?
Oh, this is such a great idea, great concept you just mentioned, Gerry. So many benefits, creating the lab. If it was about building confidence in your people, there's no better way of building the lab you just mentioned.
Exactly.
People with the trial and error, they're trying different ideas. Can you imagine what kind of confidence you're going to build in your people, that they know exactly what works, what doesn't work before they go out in the market?
Exactly. And you celebrate the learning. Like, that's the success. That's what's going to build confidence in your people. It's like, yeah, you know what, this didn't work, but you know what, I am really happy, that you brought it forward. I'm really impressed at the way you tested it. And now we have knowledge. So yeah, you as an employee, I'm very happy with what you've done, even though the idea didn't work.
Very interesting.
Very different perspective,
Wow.
right?
Yeah. And a very good one. This I think this is the key for companies to excel, that, hey, listen, try all ideas. Don't let any ideas behind. Try all of them, and let's figure out what works, what doesn't work, collaboratively, and as a team we move forward.
And get good at that. Get good at that. And you know what, you mentioned you work with IT leaders. I work with a lot of IT leaders, and a lot of different type of leaders. There's another concept that comes in here, and we're talking about writing. I'm thinking about, I was talking to a client last night, and this, we ended up on this topic, and I'm thinking about, maybe this needs an article. I'm calling it as a working title, Convergence.
Yeah.
So what happens is, it's about technology. People come up the ladder, and it's your higher and higher technological skills that are causing you to succeed until you reach a certain point of seniority. And what I used to, one technology group I ran, it was a technology strategy group. It was in a very large company, and we were matrixed throughout the company. And I would tell my leaders when I hired them, I never want to hear from a client organization that you're their technology guy or gal. That is a wrong perspective. I'm hiring you as another strategic leader who just happens to have an expertise in technology.
Got it.
But
Yep.
what you're really doing in that room is you're a business leader. You're not the technology guy or gal. Because if you are the technology guy or gal, they're going to shut you out of the conversations until it's time for implementation. And then you don't get to bring strategic thinking forward. So what I think happens is as people get to more senior levels in the organization, regardless of what discipline you came from, there's a convergence of skills. So just like we were talking a little bit earlier, like sometimes you see CEOs who are like fearful of technology and they're like, keep it away from me. I just don't want to see it. That's a mistake because there's been a convergence. Their job needs to now understand, not on a deep level, but be conversant in technology as well as many other things. I would also bring that concept around the CIO or CTO who's bringing technological concepts to his or her CEO. They have to have great communication skills. They should be great writers. They should also have an understanding of HR, finance, marketing, strategy, all of those other disciplines, because as you're getting up to, certainly at that C level, there's a convergence of skill sets. When you're in that position, your job is to move the company ahead. Yeah. You're not the technology guy or gal. You are the leader, strategic leader who's moving the organization ahead, who happens to have a deep expertise in technology, but you also understand the disciplines all around the table so that you can be a true contributor at that table. And that kind of mindset is going to trickle down your organization, and you'll also develop a better organization underneath you.
Wow, very interesting. Definitely, this is where that technology people shine actually, and this is so needed a skill set in a boardroom and on a boards of the companies. That's what the skill set is needed. So there's so many topics I want to talk to you, Gerry, but I know respect of your time as well. So give us a little bit of how did you a little bit about your journey? How did you get to this mindset?
Sure, absolutely.
What have you gone through that before we go?
Absolutely. So I have a very atypical background for where I am now, and it has a lot to do with why I am so interested in this topic. So if you look at my resume, you're going to see almost 30 years of Fortune 100 experience. You're going to see high-end MBA. You're going to see Ivy League degree. Now I run my own company. All that great stuff. But it doesn't speak to where I came from, which was actually as a son of a single mother, growing up in an impoverished area of New York City during the 1970s, which was a really difficult time. And, literally in a home where, my mother worked like 12, 16-hour days all the time. And sometimes we didn't have things like heat or electricity. And so it was like, because she literally needed to make a decision, do I pay the bills or do I feed my kids? So it was like that. And I've never known anyone who worked any harder than my mother. So that, it was that kind of life. So it was a life that, was filled with disruption. And, I sometimes refer to this path and this story as my 6% story, because, as an African-American man, born where I was, growing up where I was, I'm also a gay man. There is approximately, the data would say, a 6% probability that I would have ended up with the life that I have now. And that's not about me being great about it being 6%. I think it's really awful that it is only 6%. But the flip side of that story was that, when I moved into the corporate world, the same skills that allowed me to thrive in those very disruptive environments, I found that I could bring into my corporate life. Because, I started out with, in a very tough financial services company right out of business school, like really, really tough up-or-out environment. But the bottom line was, by that time in my life, whatever happened at work, I had a place to go home to with heat and electricity that was safe. So you know what? It wasn't so bad. So that mindset about thriving through disruption helped. what I discovered when I started leading people on teams, and people from very different backgrounds than mine, I could actually teach the people who worked for me those same skills. Fast forward, when I opened my coaching practice, again, I was in the corporate world for 30 years. And then when I was ready to move on, I decided it was time for me to start my own coaching practice, which I am loving. I find that this is the stuff that I bring to my clients, and this is the center of gravity. That's how the book was born. So it's really about life experience, what I've learned, and how it comes together. And I, as we've said before, I believe we are in currently the most disruptive time in human history, and it will only get more disruptive. So I believe passionately that what we need as a society, as individuals, as businesses, as communities, are more people who are skilled at thriving in the face of disruption. People who are going to take those courageous leaps and not get trapped in those horrible adversity, fear, paralysis cycles like we've talked about. And so, I can handle this from the business side. And so I love helping leaders develop that thriving mindset and helping them inspire it in their teams.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing the personal story. Definitely.
Absolutely.
You've been, very interesting. What I can say, the discussion, there's so much to learn from you, Gerry. The book is very interesting. So where can people find this book, and where can they order a copy of the book, Gerry?
Absolutely. So you can you can find the book on Amazon, on the Thriving Mindset, Tools for Empowerment in a Disruptive World. You can also visit me on my website, which is gerryvalentine.com. Gerry spelled with a G, GerryValentine.com. You can follow me on LinkedIn, look up Gerry Valentine on LinkedIn. I put up a series of articles. If you go to my website, you can actually download the first copy of the book as my gift to you for free. And also go to my website and feel free to contact me anytime if you think there's something you'd like to talk about, or I might be able to be of help for your organization. I'm always interested in hearing from people who are interested in how do they build the ability to thrive through disruption. So thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No, thank you so much for your time, Gerry. I enjoy the book, and I definitely encourage for all business leaders, all my fellow business leaders, get a copy of this book. And, and I'm going to include all the links below the video as well, Gerry, for your site and a LinkedIn. I will definitely encourage people to, read the book, but reach out to Gerry for a conversation. I really enjoyed. I learned so much from you, from our discussion, Gerry, today. And I will encourage all the business leaders who are watching, reach out to you, have a conversation, have a quick discussion. Who knows? There's so many ideas to, there's a biggest disruption, but also tons of opportunity in this market as well. So have a discussion with you. Who knows? There's tons of opportunities, and let's learn from each other. Let's move forward in the businesses, and but reach out to you, connect with you, have a conversation. I will encourage all of them. I learned so much from you. I really want to appreciate your time, Gerry. Thank you so much. You are very kind. I know we take a little bit longer than we expected, but
it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for your time, and we'll talk in the future.
We will. Thank you so much for having me, Gurmeet. It's been an absolute pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much, Gerry. Hi there. Thank you so much for investing time with us and watching this video. Hope you enjoyed this discussion. For next episode, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel and send your feedback. Until next time, have yourself a great day. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.